Tommaso Piccioli sat with his back against a rock, trying to minimize his body's contact with the frozen snow around him. It was dark. Tommaso didn't know exactly what time it was, but he knew it was late in the evening of April 29th, 2018. The 50-year-old's architect's eyes pierced through the darkness around him, but he saw nothing. Any noise from the 13 other members of his ski tour was drowned out by the 60-mile-per-hour winds that nipped at his exposed skin. He had spent over 14 hours hiking and skiing through the Swiss Alps, trying to find a small hut that would shelter them from the brutal temperatures. The GPS had said the hut was close, but its location had taunted them all day as they fought the cold. Now, they were stuck in small snow holes that provided little protection against the wind. Tommaso had started the night standing, but his body was exhausted, and soon enough, he was sitting against the rock, moving his arms and legs periodically to stop himself from sleeping. Although he had over 20 years of alpine experience, he had never been in a situation like the one he found himself in. However, there was one thing he had picked up from all the books he had read. He had to keep moving to keep his heart rate up in the cold, even if it was small movements. As the hours of pain ticked by, Tommaso could only think about himself. His body was frozen and the pain had ceased. His thoughts became a blur, but one question became very clear. He would think, what's the point? It's too hard. Just let go. The following morning, a rescue operation would be kick-started, and over the course of one weekend of storms in the Swiss Alps, 16 people would lose their lives. This is their story. Ski touring, or a sport that involves skiing uphill with the intent of eventually skiing down, has long been popular in the Swiss Alps. The first cases of the sport can be traced back to Nordic countries in the 1500s, where they used wooden skis to traverse the European mountains in the winter, more as a necessity than a sport. Still today, thousands of explorers travel to the Alps to traverse glaciers, valleys, and snowy peaks. But the difference today is that there is significant infrastructure for those wanting to partake in the sport, like trams, huts, and detailed guidebooks. Still, the sport unlocks a level of freedom not possible within the confines of a ski resort. It allows individuals to interact with nature in a more intimate environment with few distractions. To many, this is a form of therapy that compels them to continue exploring year after year. But with any extreme sport, there are risks. The single greatest hazard is avalanches, but there are also rockfalls, crevasses, and freezing temperatures. The haute route, known as the Chamonix-Zermatt crossing, was first skied in 1911 and remains the region's most iconic touring route. The route is completed over 6 to 7 days and takes skiers past Mont Blanc, the Matterhorn, Grand Combin, and Monte Rosa. Few treks on our planet let you experience the sight this route does. As one Swiss mountain guide said, pretty much any ski tour one day or another wants to do the haute route at least once in their life. Nearly 2,000 skiers travel the route every season, which begins in early March and, depending on conditions, runs well into May. Unlike most backcountry skiing areas in North America, the Alps offer unparalleled accessibility. Gondolas from town parking lots reach elevations of 12,000 feet in just 20 minutes. A vast network of alpine huts provides guests with heated bunk rooms, hot meals, drinks, internet access, and even plastic slippers. These well-equipped huts, integral to alpine tradition, enhance the appeal of multi-day tours, like the 112-mile Chamonix-Zermatt route, making them feasible within a week. While some skiers plan trips independently, the challenge of securing hut reservations and the risks of high alpine terrain lead many to hire professional mountain guides for logistics and navigation. In mid-April, 10 skiers would team up for a 6-day expedition across the haute route. The team comprised 50-year-old architect Tommaso Piccioli, who had over 20 years of ski touring experience and had been a member of the Alpine Club of Milan. 3 of his friends from the club would join him on the trip: 44-year-old Italian teacher Elisabetta Paolucci, Marcello Alberti, and his wife, Gabriella Bernardi, were experienced mountaineers and adventurers. The group of four typically planned their own ski tours, but because of the significant foot traffic and difficulty booking huts, they decided to hire a guide. The others in the group comprised mountaineer Francesca von Felten, who was a member of the Parma Alpine Club, 45-year-old Andrea Grigioni, a nurse from a small town northwest of Milan, 72-year-old man from Ticino, Switzerland, a German woman from Munich, the guide's 52-year-old wife, Kalina Damianova, and finally their leader, Mario Castiglioni, a 59-year-old veteran mountaineer who in 1992 had founded his own guiding company. He had successfully summited 4 of the 7 summits, 3 8,000-meter peaks in the Himalayas, and a host of other notable mountains around the world. Everyone on the expedition had significant experience, otherwise they would not have been allowed to make the trek. On April 25, 2018, the group would begin their trek from Chamonix, France, with the expedition's intent lasting 6 days, with multiple stops along the way. The first 3 days were a blur of long hours spent skiing, incredible sights, good conversation, and a generally great time. It was the end of the 3rd day when the group would find themselves at a quirky 3-story stone building, 9,000 feet in the air of the Swiss Alps. This building was called the Dies Hut, and it was a popular stopover for skiers traversing the Alps on multi-day tours. It was 6:30 a.m. on the 4th day. The sun was just peeking over the mountain, lighting the sky with an orange glow. The group of 10 were putting on their skis as they prepared for another 6-hour ski to their next refuge, the Cabane des Vignettes. The destination was different than initially planned, but there were forecasts of bad weather moving in, so they would shorten their day by 2 to 2.5 hours. The terrain was a mixture of high-altitude glaciers, cols, peaks, and untouched white powder. Even though poor weather was forecasted, the day started clear and beautiful. The sun's glow radiated off the landscape as the group began their trek. They all carried backpacks full of spare clothes, gear, snacks, water, and a small thermos of hot tea. The plan was to descend the hut towards the southwest, cross the Kilian Glacier, then make a 4 to 5 hour ascent up a long stretch of terrain toward the Pigné de Rolla. This 12,454-foot peak offers the highest elevation of the haute route and breathtaking panoramic views when the weather is good. This area of the trip is when climbers are the most exposed to poor weather. From there, it's typically a 30 to 60 minute downhill ski to the Cabane des Vignettes, which sits on a stunning but exposed ridgeline at 10,357 feet. Since the skiers were starting at 6:30 a.m., they should have completed the trek by early afternoon, but it never turned out to be that simple. The most dangerous part of the route is a small area a couple thousand feet down the slope, where skiers must find a little passageway through a series of rocks. The route is marked by a large pile of stones that previous skiers put there. It's only about 12 to 15 feet wide, so it is a complex area to find in poor visibility. To make matters worse, the hut is visible to the left of the route, but if you were to take a direct line, you would head right off a steep ice cliff. The first 3 hours of the day were spent climbing uphill under partly cloudy skies. The wind softly kissed their faces, but nothing in sight worried the group. By 10 a.m., the group was climbing in altitude, and as time passed, the forecast they had heard earlier began to take shape. The sky was quickly filling with clouds, and the wind was now raging around the group, kicking up snow from the ground, continuously reducing visibility. As the fog crept in and the snow started to fall, the members of the group could see only a few feet in front of them, yet they continued to ski uphill towards the summit for another 1 to 2 hours. Their lead guide, Mario, navigated the poor visibility with his smartphone, a common practice among guides in the Alps. Although there is little to no reception, today's technology still allows navigation apps to work effectively and is highly reliable. The downside to this method is that navigation apps drain batteries quickly, so most guides use cases with built-in secondary batteries. At some point during their climb uphill, Tommaso noticed that Mario was leading them all over the place. After some hesitation, he pulled out his phone, but it had stopped working because of the cold weather. Thankfully, he had a backup waterproof GPS unit, and after looking at the map, he quickly realized they were heading in the wrong direction. Tommaso would quickly show Mario, but he was shooed away, as Mario stated that he knew where to go. After a few more moments, Mario came back to Tommaso and asked to see his GPS. Even though Tommaso's GPS was working, it still had a crucial problem. It was loaded with the summer hiking version of the haute route. While the summer and winter routes are similar, they are not identical, and when reaching your destination safely is a matter of a few feet, specifics are essential. Nevertheless, it was the best option for the group, so they located the hut on the GPS and tried to recreate the path to their location. Between 11 a.m. and midday, the group would make it to the summit of the Pigne di Arola. The weather had only gotten worse when they reached the top. Because the wind was so strong, they decided not to stop for lunch, instead deciding to push forward as they wanted to escape the nightmare as fast as possible. It is usually a quick ski to the hut from this point, but due to only a few feet of visibility, the decreasing temperatures, and brutal wind, Mario would make the decision to have the group remove their skis, instead putting on crampons to hike down the mountain. This decision isn't unusual for the conditions, as a large group means lots of space between the front and back, and poor visibility can lead to individuals straying away from the rest. As they descended, in whiteout conditions, they encountered another group of 4 French ski tours, who were also having trouble navigating the weather. They decided to join the groups, bringing the total to 14. Tommaso had taken charge of leading at this point, and Mario followed closely behind him. While they walked, Mario pulled a rope from his bag and tied it around his waist, letting the end drag through the snow. He did this not to tie himself to another member, but to allow the other 12 skiers behind him to follow the path a little easier. While the group followed the winter ski route, they faced the incredible challenge of navigating in whiteout conditions, where GPS simply can't identify hidden dangers, like crevasses or steep drop-offs. The storm intensified, amplifying the already significant risks. As they carefully made their way down from the summit, wind gusts surpassed 50 miles per hour, temperatures plummeted, and snowfall grew heavier. Visibility shrank to mere feet, and attempting to follow the summer route through the deep snow sent them off course multiple times. What was meant to be a straightforward 60-minute journey evolved into a powerful test of endurance that stretched on throughout the afternoon. Just as they thought things couldn't get tougher, a thunderstorm rolled in, making the already challenging conditions even more severe. Despite battling howling winds, biting cold, and relentless snow for hours without food or water, the group felt their energy diminishing as daylight faded. Yet, they were determined to find the hut. They were convinced they were close, and it would show up in front of them at any moment. But that moment never came. Due to the snow, wind, and minimal visibility, the group could not find the stone cairn that led to the passageway downhill. Instead, they wandered the area looking for the hut, depleting their energy as the hours ticked by, until around 8 p.m. when night fell. Mario told the group they had to stop. The weather had made it nearly impossible to continue in the darkness, and as the group began to huddle, Mario pulled out his satellite phone and tried to call for help, but the battery was dead. They had no choice. They would have to spend the night exposed to the elements. The group picked a rocky outcropping as their campsite, but they made a crucial mistake. They were on the south-facing slope, and the wind was coming from the south, making it the worst possible spot to stop. Each member tried to dig snow holes to protect themselves against the elements, but the wind had blown most of the snow away. Their next step was to cover themselves in blankets they carried, but the wind tore right through that, making the thin protection almost useless. The situation was dire. The temperature was falling with the sun, and the group had very little physical and mental energy left. Tommaso and Mario would try to protect the women of the group in the tiny snow hole they were able to dig, but it wasn't large enough to shelter them from the worst of the wind. The 4 French skiers that had recently joined the group would move a few feet away from the rest of them, seeking a location to dig a shelter of their own. Eventually, the large group scattered across the terrain, making small groups of their own as they all tried to duck behind rocks or snow piles as best they could. Darkness surrounded the climbers, and they lost themselves in the howling of the wind. Everyone was nearing the point of collapse. Tommaso started the night standing, as he knew through his experience that he had to stay awake to keep his body moving. Even small movements would keep the blood pumping, but standing was too much effort, as time ticked on. He would eventually find himself sitting with his back against a rock as he tried to minimize the bite of the wind on his body, the hours beginning to tick by in a blur, and Tommaso just continued to move his limbs in short, small movements. It was sometime late in the night that he decided to check on the 3 women he had dug the snow hole for, and he instantly noticed they were not doing well. Their bodies were freezing and they shivered against each other. Tommaso would think to himself, they were dying. And with that thought ingrained into his mind, he made his way over to Mario, suggesting to him that they find the women a better shelter. But Mario just stared back at him. His eyes were empty as he said, I can't see anything. His eyes had been damaged by the blizzard to the point that Mario was blind. And to make matters worse, he was starting to lose his mind. Tommaso made his way back to his shelter, determined to endure the challenging conditions. The temperatures had dipped below freezing, the winds were whipping at 60 miles per hour, and the snow was swirling around him. He began to question everything. Why was he here? More importantly, he thought, what's the point? It's too hard. Just let go. As he fought the cold, at his lowest point, he smiled. He thought of his wife and mom. He told himself, I can't leave them. I'd love to just give in, but I can't do that to them. This realization was his lifeline. As dawn broke, the winds and the storm finally calmed. Tommaso had kept his eyes shielded from the fierce gusts, but when he opened them, the sky greeted him with a gray hue, offering better visibility. He stood up to check on his friends. To his relief, the German women were safe and alert nearby, while others were still recovering. Many people were lying face down, buried under the snow, but Tommaso thought to himself, there was hope. As he stood on the slope, he looked down across the valley, and there it was. At that moment, it felt so far, but it was sitting right there, the hut the group had spent over 14 hours the day before searching for. Tommaso didn't know what to do in the moment, so he pulled out his thermos of tea and began taking small sips. He shared it with the German women, as they had nothing to eat or drink for almost 24 hours, and they were all ready to collapse. As the trio sat there drinking tea, they saw a group of skiers in the distance below them. Tommaso immediately stood up and began shouting help over and over. The skiers would stop, but for 15 minutes they sat there wondering if the group had heard their cries. Then they heard something in the distance, the unmistakable sound in the air, a helicopter. Over the weekend, 7 rescue helicopters would descend into the Alps, rescuing individuals who had been stranded because of the storms. On the haute route, 7 of the original 10 would pass away due to the extreme exhaustion and cold weather. Tommaso remembers seeing Mario still sitting on the slope with his backpack on and his head slouched. He had died of hypothermia. An additional 9 skiers, climbers, and mountaineers would pass away at varying locations. The most significant conflict that resulted from the accident was that while the storm was severe, it was not sudden or unexpected. The skiers, particularly Mario, knew it was coming and had adjusted their route accordingly. While other groups abandoned their expedition, the 10 original skiers continued into the storm. Additionally, it was common practice for the guide to call ahead if there was an adjustment in the route, but Mario failed to do so. So those at the Vignettes hut never expected the group of 10. There were also alternatives to the group's high route over the Pignei di Arola summit. From the Dies hut, it is possible to descend and follow a low route on the mountain's north side. Once the conditions worsened, another choice would have been to turn around. Mario's most egregious mistake was failing to have multiple navigation sources. Most guides always have some type of contingent plan in case their smartphone fails. The group also seemed to have fallen into a trap known as the expert halo. All members were experienced enough to check the weather, research the route, and generally prepare for bad conditions. But instead, they relied on Mario because he was the expert, and they were paying him as their guide. For Tommaso, this was the biggest takeaway from the tragedy. Always prepare yourself, even if you are still hiring an expert. Nobody will ever know exactly what went through the minds of those who died on the haute route. But in recent years, the decisions that were made that day led to more training with mountain guide associations across the United States and Europe. If there is any silver lining in this tragedy, that is it.